Of the 4 major professional leagues in rugby at the minute, apologies to MLR, Super Rugby Americas, etc., right? Super Rugby, the United Rugby Championship, the Premiership, the top 14, right? The URC is the one where the team that finishes top is least likely to go on and win the ultimate title, to go on and win the final, right? We saw it, the first ever final that took place. Leinster were very solidly first place. They then lost the Ospreys, and it kind of set a precedent, right? That down the years, there is no league where there is almost no correlation between who finishes top and who wins in the end.
Yeah.
Last couple of years, Munster and Glasgow finished way down the list, right? They were finishing in about sort of 5th, 6th position, yet went on and won it.
Yeah. And sneaky into those positions sometimes.
Yeah.
It often is decided by the form team at the end of the competition. Yeah. You can kind of decide at the end of the regular season who's looking good for the final.
Yeah.
It's so weird like that, whereas, as you say, like the Premiership, it's often the team who has been best throughout the season will peak again at the final. Whereas with the URC, it's very much, it's a dark horse often takes it.
And you often see big swings in form just out the end of the Six Nations block, right? And you see teams like Cardiff this season, right? Looked well nailed in, then they had a drop in form right at the end of the season, missed out in the playoffs completely.
Yeah.
Where on the other end, you look at Glasgow and Munster in the last few years, right? Where it looked last year like Glasgow had fallen off. Then they had a little pickup towards the end of the season, and they go on and win the whole thing, right? Munster, likewise, looked out of contention. They pull away a big win away in South Africa, and that kind of builds their confidence to the place in which they go and do it repeatedly and win that final. And yet this season, I think, has followed the Premiership formula a bit closer.
Yeah.
And for the first time in the URC era, we've got the number 1 and number 2 teams in the league are the 2 finalists.
These are the 2 deserving teams to be in the final. I think it's quite uncontroversial to say. Leinster have done the thing that they've always done and not made it to the final. You know, that they've typically had a curse around the semis in the URC.
This is Leinster's first URC final.
Wow, as in us, the URC.
As the URC,
yeah. Obviously,
they won every version of the previous iteration of the competition.
The Rabbit Direct Pro 12, RIP, miss you, big man.
And have won more of this title overall than anyone else. I believe they've won it 7 times. Ospreys and Munster are both on 4. This could take them to 8. This will be the Bulls' first title. They have made 2 finals out of the 4 years, and they lost both of them.
Yeah. So, with that in mind, Leinster have been going about their business in a way that they like to. You know, that they play a very similar game every single week, and it's really effective.
Yeah.
The semi-final against Glasgow, I think we all probably thought that it would be a lot closer than it was. We probably all thought that Glasgow, obviously being the champions, and it's not like they've been playing badly, would make it a bit of a dogfight, and Leinster would just have a bit too much for them, is I think what I would have predicted.
What Glasgow did to the Stormers the week before, I think there was a little bit of you going, have they found form at the right time again, right? And I think a lot of us got lulled too much into what happens in the URC.
Glasgow are hard to resist when they're playing well, aren't they?
Likewise,
and
Munster,
it's easy to get
right?
carried away with them.
And they fell over against the Sharks in penalty shootout. But there was a big temptation there of going well, these teams that hit form at the right time, even the Scarlets, who if they hadn't come up against Leinster, you've gone, well, they found their best form at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And yet, instead, it's just fallen down to the best teams instead of the teams in form.
The Bulls similar to Leinster in a way that every team that they should knock over, they do it with so much conviction. You know, that they pick up bonus points when they have to. When they go away and have what would be a big scalp, they often pick them up.
Yeah.
They've just been really consistent throughout the season, and they're a really tough team to stop.
The thing about the Bulls for me is I think last season, the Bulls at home were the best team in the URC, right? They comprehensively demolished everybody. Scrum, back play, everything. They were phenomenal whenever they were at home. However, you put them on the road and they were much more inconsistent and they were losing games that they should be winning comfortably. And then you'd send the same 15s out to go and play, out at their park. And instead, suddenly, it will be 30, 40 point margin for the Bulls win instead of losing away from home. This season, they have largely fixed an awful lot of that.
Yeah.
And there were still a few performances where perhaps they should have got a result and they didn't. You look at their result at Parker Scarlets, you look at a couple of their other results kind of around, as well as things like, they very narrowly beat Benetton. But when they have had their full-strength team out, which we would imagine they're not going to rest any players to the final this weekend. Their full strength team, right? I'll give you the results that they have pulled off on the road, right? So they beat Ospreys 1929 in Swansea. They beat Connacht 12-28 in Galway. Benetton 15-17 in Treviso. I've stupidly just written the Bulls. They beat the Bulls 13-16. That was Munster.
They beat everyone.
They beat Munster in Thomond Park, which is a huge achievement.
Yeah.
Not many people go and do that. Cardiff, right as Cardiff were coming back into it, they were doing incredibly well at that point, and they battered them 45-11 at the Arms Park. And then Glasgow, who again, Glasgow have lost. I mean, they lost the Ospreys mid-season this year, and that was their first home loss in, I think, 3 years. It was their first regular season loss in the URC. The Bulls were the second team to do it. Won 19-26. That is Glasgow's heaviest loss at home in the URC era.
Wow.
7 points isn't a great margin.
Sure. But those are basically the two hardest places to go win, especially as a South African team. That playing away from home is so much harder as a South African team than it is for basically anybody else, because you've got to travel so much further.
You've got to travel a long way and adapt to winter conditions for all of those. They were all played in the Northern Hemisphere winter.
Yeah,
like that Glasgow game was in the pouring rain. Munster, I believe, was the same. Like, they have gone over and played in the worst conditions and changed drastically the South African summer.
When you're used to playing at Loftus, then you have to go to Rodney Parade. That's a shock to the system right there.
So their away form has improved drastically this season.
Yeah.
Their ability to go on the road and win those games has hugely increased. And yes, there's still the odd result, but it tended to be when they mix up the team.
Yeah.
And their first 15 has remained strong throughout the entire run.
Yeah. And I think a lot of those names speak for themselves. Like some of the guys that have got up front, you're looking at like Corbus Visa has been on phenomenal form all season. Jan Hendrik Wessels, I really like up front. He's such a powerful runner, scrummager, just all around the park, just hitter. He's one of those brutes that you don't want to come up against. And
Johan Grobler, almost exactly the same.
Yeah. And those guys getting parity against Oxentrae last week speaks volumes for itself, like as the dominant scrummager in the world. I think the guy who's grabbed the most headlines up front has been Cameron Hanekom.
Yes.
He is... who's sadly been poached by South Africa in the autumn.
I know, this proud Welsh heritage.
Yeah.
He grew up with this. This is his Di the Dragon.
Yeah.
Who he had as a child and would look to and say, one day I shall represent you.
But Rossi stole him off him and posted him to us. And it's just not on.
The things people would do for a World Cup, man.
Honestly, yeah, it's crazy.
Just because you don't want to play for a shit team doesn't mean you've got to abandon your whole heritage and pride.
Unbelievable. But yeah, he's been phenomenal all season. His offloading game, his power running game, just everything about him. He can work in the middle of the park or out wide. He's a phenomenal player.
The way in which he's built out the rough areas of his game as well.
Yeah.
The way in which he's just improved quietly, that I think he burst onto the scene last season, and a lot of people were like, oh, this guy's good. And it went from like a guy you'd seen bits of the season before to like him playing week in, week out and being very good.
Yeah.
And this season, I think he's taken up that consistency in the kind of way you want someone who's going to be an international to be. Yeah. You want them doing those jobs inside, like week in, week out. You want them not putting in a handful of man of the match performances over the season. You want them being at like an 8 out of 10 every single week,
100%.
rather than a 9 some weeks and a 6 the others, right?
Yeah.
And that isn't to say he was like necessarily dropping down those performances, but like perhaps there's been fewer games where you go and like he's the best player on the pitch, but he's always been like second or third this season. Speaking
of always an 8 out of 10, Emblos Popier at 9 is phenomenal. Such a good kicking game, so quick off the mark. And yeah, if you leave any space around the breakdown, he will fizz it in there to a forward to run into. And occasionally he runs himself as well. Very good at that. However, I think my favourite player to watch in this team, or do you want to say something?
No, I've got someone as well. I'm interested if we pick the same guy.
Have we both picked David Kriel?
No,
we haven't.
No, go with David Kriel, please.
So David Kriel is just a complete rugby player. He has scored 8 tries in the last 9 games. He's been on ludicrously good form in the URC. And that stat does not do justice to how good this guy is, because his assisting game and also his kicking game are both absolutely outstanding. You look at this 50-22 he puts in against Cardiff. If you play this at full speed, it's the speed between him picking up the ball and spotting the space and putting it in behind there and it beating Mason Grady to the touchline. The guy is just phenomenal. His vision, his running with the ball, his offloading, and his finishing ability, because he's so unbelievably strong. He came through as a fullback, as a powerful runner from the back, and now they've got Willy Leroux at the back as somebody who manages the game a little bit more. It allows him to move into the centres and just get more touches of the ball, get over the gain line a little bit. And he's just one of those players that if you give him the ball as many times as you can, you're buying tickets for him to potentially break the line and potentially just make cheap yards. That he looks like an easy guy to stop, but that upper body strength he has is so good. I love watching this guy play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the standout area of his game for me is something you haven't even mentioned, if I were to pick out his key attribute, which is his dummy lines.
Yes.
Right? He is one of the best dummy runners in the game. The way in which he is so good, and it's such a specific skill, at making himself subtle yet look like he's getting the ball, right? He's not somebody screaming and shouting and doing the full like, yeah, I want the ball, look at me. It's more like a kind of like, yeah, give me the ball. Right?
He's so square all the time in his lines as well.
And the way he selects lines based on defenders, the way he isn't running something pre-called, he's never half-arsed about it, and it draws in so much space, right? And when you have the likes of Kane and Moody, most notably, formerly Kurtley Aronsa, and then, as we mentioned him, one of the channel's real spirit animals, Wilco Louw, alongside the likes of George Ford, Pauline Bourdon-Sansus, there's a handful of players I think we've really globbed onto. Louw's ability to read a game and to take the correct option, to weigh things up, to be thinking 2 phases in advance is unlike... There's a very, very small number of players in the world with his rugby IQ, ever with his rugby IQ.
There's so many players in that back line who are great in unstructured scenarios, including, to an extent, Johan Hurson at 10. But Wilco Louw is the fail-safe. He's the backstop amongst all of that.
And you look at man of the match performance a few weeks ago, and even though there's a few errors in there, as is increasingly standard for him in his mid-30s, but his just game intelligence and his ability to read the game and unlock things around him
the wrists
is unreal, right?
Yeah.
So you then look at this pack and what they can do to provide him space and provide him opportunity, and then the likes of Kriel buying him an extra split second by drawing a defender's eyes.
Was that the guy you were going to talk about?
No, it wasn't. But I will always talk about Wilco Louw for 10 minutes if you give me a chance. Do you want to talk about George Ford for a bit?
Yeah.
He isn't in the Premiership final, so we've got to have some way to do this. So the guy I want to bring up is Wilco Louw.
Oh, yes. Talk to me about Wilco Louw.
I think, right, and this is one of these problems, right? People never give props the props that they deserve.
Sure.
Right? No props ever won World Player of the Year. I think there's a very good case for Wilco Louw being URC Player of the Season.
Yeah.
The Bulls have possibly the best scrum in all of club rugby. When you go through and you look at the core stats, right, guess what percentage of the Bulls' scrums are won with a penalty? It's 36%.
Bloody hell.
Or 36.5, so you can round up to 37.
That's crazy.
So
with
about a third of their scrums result in a penalty.
Full arm.
Right? Yeah. Full arm penalty, third of their scrums. And when you consider they come up against teams who win penalties consistently, right? However...
Ox plays in this league.
Yeah. You get a handful of teams like that.
Andrew Porter plays in this league.
So you look at Benetton are about that figure, which surprised me an awful lot. Teams like Leicester Tigers and Ospreys, and there's a few others who are known as great scrummaging teams, they are around a similar figure in terms of the percentage of scrums that result in penalties. But broadly, the thing you do, and we made a video on this about a year ago on who had the best scrum in the world, and we kind of used it as a chance to springboard off and talk about what it means to have a good scrum, right? Generally, those teams win somewhere around high 80s to like 90, 91% of their scrums overall, right? Because the moment you start playing for penalty, you bring the referee into it. And the chance of him penalising you or her penalising you goes up drastically.
Sure.
However, the Bulls still managed to win 95% of their own scrums. Those are the figures we normally associate with teams like Fiji, the Fijian and Drua.
So it's safe to keep the ball in the scrum.
Yeah, Gloucester, teams who get the ball in and out, so their scrum completion rate is higher, right? Because they're not keeping the ball in the scrum for a long time. They're not risking a penalty being given. The Bulls' scrum percentage is that high. They, from a kind of statistical point of view, if I were to be doing that video now, I would be looking at them after this season and going, oh, they have a better scrum than Springboks. They have the best scrum in the world.
Also, remember a couple of years ago when, granted, Adam Jones was the factory of this, but when Harlequins had one of the best scrums in the Premiership,
it was Wilco
who's
Louw.
the common denominator there?
It was Wilco Louw.
Wilco Louw.
Right? You think about also his carrying, right? And he's not a guy who carries often.
He's a bloody unit.
He runs upright, and he is like a breeze block coming at you. He is unbelievably solid.
He's fit as well.
Yeah.
Like, he lasts a long time. And it's not like he's doing like disposable carries when he's putting so much into the scrum.
Yeah.
It's just insane that he's like 4th choice for the Springboks.
I know. But he has been...
He'd start for any other nation in the world.
He would. Genuinely, he would. You could literally... He'd start for Ireland.
Thomas
He'd
Dutoit
start for France.
Yeah.
Like, he'd be... start for literally anyone else.
It's crazy.
And he isn't making Springbok squads. Like, if there was a World Cup squad named tomorrow, he wouldn't be in it. And that is insane. But yeah, I think he's been absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, agreed.
And would be the player I'd pull out from the Bulls' point of view. However, we should probably talk about Leinster.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting one, because the narrative going into this final around Leinster is very much they keep bottling it.
Sure.
Right? The narrative is they lost 3 Champions Cup finals in a row. They then lost a semi-final. They haven't made the final of this competition before. They haven't won it under its current guise as the United Rugby Championship. And yet they have finished top of the log all but 1 seasons of this so far, 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. There's nothing feels different about this year to previous ones where they've done it.
That's it.
Is the thing. And yet there's still in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, yeah, but it's Leinster.
Yeah.
They win rugby games. The fact is a final doesn't change anything. And there's a lot of strands to this, right? One is the Sam Prendergast thing, the fact that they've got a new 10 in who has been broadly very good throughout the season, but also can't tackle. So they will be, the Bulls will be sending Cameron Hanekom down his channel at all times, because why wouldn't you? You know, that's a part of it, that the keys have been handed over to Prendergast and they've put a lot of faith in him, right?
I think one angle of this, though, before we move on, is Sam Prendergast, and you say nothing's changed, he is the only thing that's changed for Leinster, right?
Yeah. And it's a drastic change.
Nineveh has obviously had them lead on defence a bit more. They're less of a kind of attack, an all-rounder oriented team. As we talked about in the video on the offload a few weeks ago, all-rounder teams are dying out. Like, those teams don't win anymore. You look at Saracens dropping down to basically a mid-table team now, right? And so Leinster have pivoted into being a defensive team with attack on top as well. So they've sort of gone for the 2 extremes rather than this.
They take shortcuts and get into the 22 and then they attack around you.
Yeah. But Leinster have very much changed their identity over the last 18 months, which I think is really interesting. It's clearly in the Jack Nineveh.
Yeah, it's very much Nineveh's way of playing rugby, isn't it?
Yeah. And they haven't gone away from a lot of that DNA, but like they have evolved themselves. But the one thing they do have now in terms of the attack is Sam Prendergast, who is an out-and-out attack managing fly half. He's not a game manager, he's not a defensive fly half, he's not a guy who calls anything on himself. What he does is he organises the attack and the shape around him, and he creates try-scoring opportunities. He assisted more line break opportunities than anyone else in the URC this season. He is, in all of European rugby as well beyond that, like he is unbelievable at what he does. And obviously there are weak points to his game, but...
As addressed in a video we did before.
I would say, for me, even at this early stage in his career, he is a better player than Ross Byrne. Who's been playing there at 10 in the last few years for Leinster.
Prendergast has more mistakes that will make headlines than Ross Byrne.
Yeah.
Right? It's just true.
Yeah.
Like, he would do more good and he would do more bad than Ross Byrne does. He would just be more of a central figure. But a lot of people will point to the semi-final of Europe where, they bottled it, so to speak. And Prendergast, I don't think, was bad in that game.
Prendergast had a perfectly good game where he missed a couple of tackles that were pretty terrible.
Yes.
There were maybe 3 or 4 absolutely terrible mistakes.
Like, attacking-wise...
much more... Yeah. You looked at his performance, if you broke down everything he did in that game, right? I reckon you're looking at like 70 good decisions, 3 or 4 bad decisions.
Yeah.
And then in a few of those cases where he made a good decision, he executed it terribly.
Yes, I agree with that.
And you go with maybe a Ross Byrne figure is giving you, like a lower percentage of good decisions, and you go, right, but he's executing them higher.
However, the thing that you'd imagine will have by his side this time that will help him out is Geordie Barrett.
Yeah.
Because Geordie Barrett's kicking game will really, really help Prendergast. He's got that long spiral kick, much like Prendergast, and they can both send it miles. That's huge. That would take some pressure off the Prender child. Also, Geordie Barrett has the distribution. He can step in at first receiver and let Prendergast take a step back, see what's on in behind or whatever. The main thing that Geordie Barrett brings that you can't say of Prendergast is his carrying game. Is that he's unbelievable at just getting over the gain line and setting a platform for Leinster to play around, getting straight back to his feet, scanning, going, brilliant, now we'll play, And having that as an option, I just think will make such a huge difference. And he was brilliant in the semi-final as it happened, because he's Geordie Barrett, of course he was.
Yeah, and Also, you've got James Gibson Park, who
Yeah.
was excellent in the semi-final as well, and has just been playing some phenomenal rugby.
Yeah, I want to talk about Gibson Park for a little bit.
Okay, please.
'Cause
You usually do.
It's a video about rugby that involves Leinster, so it's an excuse for me to talk about Gibson Park. But the Leinster attack almost never ceases to amaze me because they just bring out a new way of running it every single time. But unpredictability is their thing, isn't it? And they send so much of it through 9. So I want to look at just a couple of tries that they scored in that semi-final. So the first one that they scored, literally the first couple of minutes of the game,
Yep.
they get the breakdown turnover off the kickoff, goes to the corner, and they attack from there. So here, they go one phase left and one phase right, go back to the blind side, and then immediately, because everything's on in both directions, Georgie Horn just scoots in a little bit to go into the guard position. And Tommy O'Brien looks up and goes, brilliant, I can target him. Takes the ball on the cut from Gibson Park and just fires into George Horn as the lightest carrier within this channel for Glasgow. It gets over the gain line, and most importantly, it gets them up to within 2 metres of the try line. And suddenly Glasgow are going, right, we need to all jam in because the pick and go is a genuine threat now. And it's something that Leinster quite like to do, is pick and go around the breakdown or go for little short carries. And they have on their feet here Rabah Slimani, they have Jack Conan, they have Joe McCarthy. All of these are huge carriers of the ball.
Yeah.
So, of course, Glasgow are going, let's get up and let's put a huge hit on them. But just inside of Adam Hastings in the 10 channel and outside all of the forwards who are looking up at these guys is Dan Sheehan, who instead of running like a winger, he runs what I like to call the Hadley Parks line here, where he cuts the inside of 10 very narrowly, and because 10 has to keep his head on a swivel and go, brilliant, like I've got to watch my opposite 10, I've got to watch what's going on at the breakdown, and Sheehan is perfectly in the gap in between those two things, and he cuts that so beautifully.
So it's a brilliant example of what Leinster do and of using their reputation, right? Glasgow have played Leinster, they played them in Europe, they've also played them during the regular season, and now they played them here, right? They played them repeatedly this season. They will have been so on edge and so looking for this. And they've also played those games in quite a short space of time, right? That they played knockout game, they then played the last round of the regular season, and now they played this game. That's in the space of maybe 6 weeks. They played Leinster 3 times, right? They know their system. They know their attack inside out, right? So they know what Leinster like to do is they go from bam, we hit up, they then hit up there, and then they go back to that same space again, right? Yeah. So the really smart thing about this is they set up to do that, to target those same defenders again and again and again. And it means that when Gibson Park flashes outside them, Glasgow are too used to the way Leinster defend to even stop to think they might do something different. And instead, the key thing is, James Gibson Park is always doing this shit. We then bring in the fact that Dan Sheehan is currently, and we mentioned Wilco Louw as a player of the season contender, right? Dan Sheehan might be, I think he is top 5 form players on the planet right now. Like
He's
Louis
shit hot.
Bielbiere, Ardi Sarvea, there's a handful of Sasha Feinberg and Gomez Zulu's playing incredibly well. Kieran Hardy. You've got a few in contention there. Jack Morgan actually, unironically. But yeah, he then hits that line. That is a centre's line.
Yeah.
That is not a hooker's job. The hooker's job is to wait there and possibly fill in case they need him for the ruck.
Just a proper rugby player in all facets.
He's unbelievable.
Not to sound like Stuart
and
Barnes.
to hit that line the way he's looking up and checking on, the inside defender, and then outside you've got, Adam 0800 00 1066.
Brilliant.
And he can hit that line on the inside of him. It's an absolutely phenomenal line. Gibson Park's pass is so quick. The way he doesn't look up at it really, he just trusts you in to hit the line.
The thing that you said a minute ago, you're so right. We as fans, as bloody pundits, or whatever you want to call people, as analysts on telly or the analysts who are with the teams, as professional rugby players, right? We all just need to take for granted that James Gibson Park can throw this pass. Yeah. That you need to just take for granted that he's the best passer of ball in the world, at the moment. He just is, and that's something that he will bring into his game in a very unshowy sort of a way. That ball is on, brilliant, I'll fire it to Dan Sheehan. This try as well that Jamie Osborne scored later on.
So similar.
Very similar. We talk a lot about positionless rugby as a concept. This is kind of a different take on that, that everyone just knows the system inside out. And also they're 20, 30 points up at this point. So they are just playing it like this. They don't care that they're all in the wrong positions. So you've got Tommy O'Brien here in a pod. Gibson Park fires it to the outside latch, which is Dan Sheehan, carries there. Sam Prendergast slides onto the wing, and he's got his hand up. He wants to finish a try here. Instead, the defence will follow him. He hits James Ryan on the jump-off, makes a very nice carry, presents the ball nicely. And then, at this point, O'Brien points at Ryan Baird, wanting Jameson Gibson Park to pass to him. And of course, this time, all the Glasgow forwards fire on him and go like, oh, it's Ryan Baird, we've got to mark him. And also he's got a winger with him who's going to latch on and drive him through. Gibson Park doubles down. Instead of firing it to outside the forwards and inside the 10 channel, he fires it to outside the 12 channel. That's how much they've condensed Glasgow by playing left and right, back and forth, blind and open. That at this point, this is all the way onto the outside of Tom Jordan. This pass is phenomenal, and Jamie Osborne is just there ready and waiting for it. He's so flat to the line by the time he catches the ball. He just has to put it down. He's basically unopposed. James Gibson Park one-ups himself with that pass, but once again, as I say, I think we need to take the pass for granted.
Yeah.
It's the Leinster shape that is so flawless here.
Yeah.
If you're the Bulls, how on earth do you stop this? Can you?
Yeah.
Or do you have to just do what, in a way, Northampton did and accept that that's going to happen and go, oh, here's some all-out attack as well, right?
I do think there's a question mark to be raised around Leinster, though, in terms of the way they took their foot off the gas a bit in the second half there.
Yeah.
And same thing against the Scarlets, right? And we've seen this a few times over the season, is in big games, Leinster have got out to really commanding leads and then they haven't put them to bed further. And there are those 2 European knockout games against Glasgow and Harlequins where they demolished them and they were 80-minute performances. But then, other than that, I think an awful lot of the time, Leinster have got into a really commanding position early on and then clung on.
Yeah.
And I do think there's maybe a question mark around that. That Scarlets game was so much closer than it should have been.
Yeah.
They should have blown them off the park, and they didn't. And then Glasgow, I think... Look, Glasgow are a really good team. I think they look quite tired.
Yeah.
And I think you had a lot of players, obviously they had some injuries, but they had a lot of players just coming back from injury.
Yeah.
And so on paper you look at it and go, brilliant, they've got a really strong team out. But actually when you go, oh, they've just played game after game after game after not playing for a long time, they looked quite tired. They looked exhausted from that, right? And then the weird team selection of Sione at 13 and, you know, and there's a few bits
Tom
around
Jordan,
there.
12,
Jordan at 12, yeah. It sounds strange to say because it was semi-final and it's last year's champions, but like I think they easily could have, maybe should have beaten Glasgow by more.
Oh, don't get me wrong. That's exactly what Nina will be saying.
Yeah.
Is that they let in 2-3 tries at the end. That
Definitely.
Jamie Dobie one was so preventable.
Sione's was silly.
Yeah.
Like, he is ridiculous
He's
and he is
bullshit,
brilliant.
though.
But also, like, you've got a team of the best players in the world. You've got the most
Yeah.
expensively assembled
Individual
squad in
solo
rugby.
tries probably shouldn't be happening at
Yeah.
that point.
Exactly.
But also, it's Sione Tuipulotu, so you need a bit of an allowance
Yeah.
for that. But I know what you mean.
Yeah.
mean. So at this point, it's hard to know where it leaves us with regards to the final. Because in terms of the rugby that's being played, I have to look at Leinster and go like, oh, I think they will win this. But also, you're right to bring up the narrative of it all. That when you've been in this position so many times and you've not won anything for a while, this is some of these players have won quite a lot. Some of them in their careers are yet to have any trophies, but have played lots of knockout
Or
rugby.
at least yet to play in a final, right?
Yeah.
Someone like Jamie Osborne was in wider squads when they last won a title, but he wasn't playing, you know? There's plenty of players that are now senior guys that only know losing finals and semi-finals.
And for better and for worse, that changes you as a squad, as a personality of your squad.
We felt it, I think, in last year's Champions Cup final, and actually the one before that against La Rochelle, where they were so desperate to win it because they felt a pressure, right? And if Leinster win this, it won't be jubilation, I think it will be for the Bulls. It will be relief.
Yeah.
Like, they will be relieved that they finally won it and people can stop talking about them as bottlers. Because at the minute, they, I think, have overtaken Clermont Auvergne in, you know, the early 2010s as the most bottling team in professional rugby. Like,
Proportionate to the talent they have in their squad.
exactly. Like, that Clermont team that lost final after final after final.
They
but was the
deserve
best
so
team
much
in
more silverware
Europe
than
around
they've
the time.
won because of how good they are.
And Leinster have been
It's
the
not
best,
an insult to Leinster.
pound for pound, Leinster have been the best team in Europe for the last 5 years, right? And I think it's them to lose.
They have nothing to show for it, and
yeah.
their fans will be fucking fuming about
Yeah.
that. And I've seen people calling for Leo Cullen, like, this is his last chance.
Yeah.
And I totally get it.
Yeah.
Because their squad deserves to have a lot of silverware.
Yeah.
They will feel the pressure this weekend, no doubt. And the pressure is on them. They will go in as favourites, whether they like it or not. They're at home in Dublin,
It's
like...
a weirdly incredibly consequential game, right?
Yeah.
Because if they turn this around, if they pull it off, suddenly you're looking at some of the pressure for next season's Champions Cup is taken off them, but also some of the pressure is taken off Ireland, right? Because that feeling that will start to creep in, if it becomes 4 years on the trot now, rather than just 3, suddenly does that build into a World Cup next time? right?
Who knows?
Does that keep building in? Because I think we saw a little bit of it as they fell behind against France in the Six Nations.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of like, oh God, this happens, doesn't it? In the big deciders.
Good point. There's
And, like,
quite a lot
is it gonna
potentially
become-
riding
yeah.
on this. Potentially.
Like, I don't know. I think it's interesting. And I think the Bulls are not going to go away quietly. I think their scrum is such a weapon. It's worth noting that Leinster's scrum is actually right up there in terms of quality. The signing of Rabah Slimani is incredibly smart because it means even when they don't have Porter and Furlong starting, they have been able to keep out a dominant scrum. He's been available all season, he hasn't picked up an injury. So that's been really, really useful for them. The big point was during the Six Nations, right? When you go back 2 years ago, they played the Ospreys during the international break and they got minced at the scrum and almost lost that game as a result. This time, you know, Rabah Slimani's in there and they minced the scrum, right?
Yeah.
And suddenly it allowed them to remain on top, both during those windows when their starters are missing, but more importantly, in the later stage of the game when a Furlong goes off, right? And obviously Thomas Clarkson and Jack Boyle really coming through really helps as well as young players, Gus McCarthy as well. But I think we are seeing them develop. It sounds daft because he's shot 9, but right, and of course he understands the importance of the scrum. But I think that's something he's brought in.
I know what you mean.
Is going like, we need a dominant scrum. Like having a good scrum isn't enough. We want to be dominant there. And maybe they managed to keep the Bulls at bay there. I think there may be less Bulls dominance than we expect. But over the full season, they average a penalty every third scrum on their own put-in, right? And they also win 14% of opposition balls, the Bulls,
That's
which is insane.
crazy.
Which is more than any other team in
That's
international or club
ludicrous.
rugby. 14% of opposition scrums they win.
That could turn the game, honestly, like up front. I think you're right, and we'll wrap this up now, right? You were right to mention a prop as the star man of this game. Like it basically all hinges on how well Wilco Louw plays. That if he's an 8 out of 10, Leinster could sneak it. If he's a 10, there is not a chance they're even competing. It's true. It's true. And if he's a 6, then, you know, maybe Leinster will run away with it.
Congratulations to Andrew Porter.
But I think that's highly unlikely. But that you're right that this is a game, because we know what Leinster do out wide. We even know what the Bulls do out wide, right? The question is, how brutal are they up front, the Bulls? And that can hinge this whole game.
I honestly
it's
think,
on the props.
And generally, when you look at these games, you think set piece, you think the way they attack, does it line up to the defence? And generally, I think a lot of games over the last few years have been, I think it's changing to be more attack-based, but have been more by kicking, right? But I think the thing that will decide this game is discipline. I think it'll be, if the Bulls can remain disciplined, then they will win this game.
3 yellow cards in the semi-final. And that cost them a try.
That was a huge problem. And yet, Leinster, I don't think they've got a yellow card problem, but we are seeing this really creep into the game. With Caelan Doris injured as well, I think it increases drastically. We haven't mentioned him at all, but he is a huge loss for them. The likes of Joe McCarthy and James Ryan and Andrew Porter, and there's a few of these like
Baird,
who have the habit of giving away the odd really stupid penalty. And I think
it's not quantity, it's like
it's the timing,
specific.
right?
Yes.
And I think it's Ryan and McCarthy in particular have this knack of being like 5 metres out from their own line, they've got possession and they'll just like dive in the side of a ruck.
Get carried away.
And those could be the moments that cost the game. And it might be the Bulls pick up 3 yellow cards, right? But Leinster give away 2 stupid penalties when they're trying to exit, and that cost them the game. Right? And I think that's
potentially 10, 12, 14 points.
That is what we're looking at here. I think it's going to be a tight game. I think there is a chance that Leinster run away with it, but I'm expecting a tight game. And a little bit of me is saying I think the Bulls are going to do it.
It's going to be good. And it's good to give our props to props. Who's going to win the Rabbit Direct Pro 12 this season? Who even knows?
Probably Connacht.